Miss Adventure here. Thank you for joining me for another Storytime Sunday where I read one of my Learning League adventures, or I offer up a book that you can check out at your local library that covers many of these same themes. Today the theme that we are talking about is Native American activism, because this is the Native American activism mystery. So the reason that I wanted to create a resource about this is because I believe that Indigenous people of this country, our First Nations people, our Native Americans, they have been framed throughout our whole public school curriculum as a submissive people who, while they put up their fights at first, recognize the superiority of the white colonists and the American government, and eventually just step back to let us make this land into what it has become today. I reject that narrative. I think it is false. Native American people and all of our Indigenous brothers and sisters have been rebelling against the American government and resisting and pushing back this whole time. This whole time, for generations upon generations. And rightfully so, as they have occupied this land for 15,000 years. I think it is time to recognize their wisdom and give them a little seniority, right? I think they've earned it. They've been here quite some time. So let's learn a little bit about how resilient and powerful and how these people resist being taken advantage of. So, the Native American activism mystery. The Learning League was on a field trip at the National American Indian Museum, and the bonfire ceremony was about to start. "Many tribes have such interesting traditions that happen around the fire," said DeAndre, taking a seat in the grass. "I can't wait to see all the native dances." "Me neither," said Becca, "but we need to remember that these ceremonies could have been lost forever if these Indigenous people had not survived." Carmen nodded and said, "That's right. These native people have been through many difficult times, and sometimes it was America that made their lives hard." There's actually a whole section of this museum that is about how the Native Americans had to protest under unfair treatment in this country, Amar stated as he read the museum map. "We'll have to check it out." Music started playing, and all the kids tried to get the best view of the bonfire. "Hey, someone is standing too close to the fire," cried Becca. "It's the bungler, and oh no, his clothes are on fire, and he's running inside the museum." 10 minutes later, the fire department had arrived and taken care of the fire, and the League was comforting the bungler about his accident. "It could have been worse. I only burned up one exhibit about a Native American protest," he sighed. The kids looked at each other, knowing what they had to do. "Time for your class to help the Learning League figure out which activism event the baffled bungler burned up." That silly bungler. So, your kids will read the mystery. They will have clues to solve, and if you recall, there's also a completely digital option. So don't feel like you have to use this actual booklet. For you distance learning people out there, there's an option for you too. So they read the clues, they work in these workspaces to solve these mysteries, and at the end, they'll be left with one event of activism. So let's go ahead and talk about these events. We have Mount Rushmore. I knew my dogs were about to bark. That is why I paused for a second. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, so Mount Rushmore. This land was first snatched from the Sioux people when white colonists showed up, but they battled back, and they were left with a treaty in 1868 that promised that all the Black Hills, including these very hills right here, would belong to the Sioux forevermore. That was until gold was found on this land, and America stole the land back for the second time in order to take that gold right out from under them. The Sioux never got this land back, and in fact, insult to injury, 60 years after taking the land back, we carved white men into the sacred mountains. Classic move, and right to resist. We need to teach our children that This cannot happen. History cannot repeat itself. We cannot take land and desecrate it for our own glory. It's bizarre. That's not what America's about. It is our past actions, but it's not what America's about. Okay, Occupy Alcatraz. This is also a really cool story about another broken treaty. The American government had said any unused land that was once government owned will immediately go to the native people. Well, Occupy Alcatraz was about Alcatraz prison, which had been shut down. It's an entire island. It was no longer holding prisoners. It was not being used. And indigenous people looked around and they were like, hey, this is a great way for America to keep its promise to us. So, over the course of 19 months, 600 people lived on this island. They had a radio station, they had a clinic. It was awesome and an awesome act of resistance in our nation's history. Protect the Peaks. This is a movement that is ongoing because these San Francisco peaks in Arizona are sacred, and I mean sacred, to 13 tribes. This is religious land. They believe that the first humans originated from this land. It is very holy, very special to them. And for many years it has been wrapped up in a lawsuit over religious freedom. But the American government did not protect the native tribes. Instead, they handed this holy land over to a ski resort. And guess what? There isn't even enough snow in this region to make it a viable ski resort. So, another example of insult to injury, this one a little more modern. They are recycling sewage water to put snow up on the mountain. Sewage water on holy lands. It is salt in the wounds, you guys. It is not okay. So this is currently ongoing. There is a ski resort that they're trying to bring down. Standing Rock. This was actually the first event that I was aware of, and I was in my 20s, of Native American activism. This time, the American government did not find gold, but again, a modern example of gold. We found oil on this land, and this land was a burial site, a sacred ceremonial burial site. They dug through it. It is an atrocity. And also, they called themselves water protectors because this was very close to the Missouri River, which millions of Americans, not just indigenous people, rely on for their day-to-day water needs. And thank you to our indigenous brothers and sisters who were fighting to protect it for all of us. They fought to stop this pipeline, which was not stopped. And there was actually quite a bit of violence. And the pipe leaked. There have been multiple leaks. So, again, we need to listen to the wisdom of our indigenous brothers and sisters. And there's a lot to be learned from what they have to teach us. And lastly, Trail of Broken Treaties, which it goes into how they followed the path of the Trail of Tears. This was in the 70s, I believe. Yes, in 1972. And they occupied a government building. They wanted to change the name of the Federal Bureau because it was racist. And they had 10 demands, which we're not listening to. But if we keep, this is an important act of resistance, and our kids need to know about it, and our kids need to internalize it so that they can remedy the wrongs that have been done to our First Nations people. It's an important thing, and we have a right, a duty as educators to show our children a different worldview than what has been always taught. We need to show them other pockets of stories. It isn't all just one story, right? History is made up of many narratives, and this is one of our nation's most important narratives. And it's exciting. So, please purchase the Native American Activism Mystery today. I think you will have many important discussions about resistance and what that looks like, and how our Native American brothers and sisters are so important to this country. Okay, thank you so much. Have a great week. I'll see you next week for Storytime Sunday again. All right, adventure awaits, guys. See you next week.